Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today in Unit 6, Justice, we are going to start our lecture with topic Rawls' Liberal Egalitarian Principles of Social Justice. Let us now discuss first critique of utilitarianism. Rawls' principles of social justice are a corrective to the liberal utilitarian principle of the greatest happiness of the greatest number. What then are his objections to utilitarianism? Rawls recognizes that liberal utilitarianism marked a progressive welfare-oriented departure from classical liberalism preoccupation with individualistic rights. Yet, utilitarianism is, in Rawls' view, a morally flawed theory of justice. Its moral flaw is that it justifies or condones the sacrificing of the good of some individuals for the sake of the happiness of the greatest number. For the utilitarian, the criteria of justice in a society is the aggregate sum of utility or happiness or welfare it produces, and not the well-being or welfare of each member of the society. In his critique of an alternative to utilitarianism, Rawls derives inspiration from Immanuel Kant's moral idea of the freedom and equality of every human being. According to Kant, every human being is to be treated as an end in himself or herself, and not as means to the ends of others. It is this liberal egalitarian moral principle which is violated by utilitarianism and which Rawls reinstates in his theory of social justice. Both in his method or procedure of arriving at the principles of distributive or social justice, and consequently in the content or substance of those principles. Rawls tries to give centrality to the moral principle of the freedom and equality of every person. Now let us move to the next point, the Rawls liberal egalitarian principles of justice. According to Rawls, a stable, reasonably well-off society is a cooperative venture for mutual advantage. Along with cooperation, there is also conflict among its members regarding their share of the burdens and benefits of social living. The purpose of principles of social justice is to ensure that the distribution of the benefits and burdens of society is just or fair to all its members. The basic institutions of society should, according to Rawls, be so constructed as to ensure the continuous distribution of social primary goods to all members of the society in a fair or just manner. Social primary goods are goods which are distributed by the basic structure of a society. They include rights and liberties, powers and opportunities, and income and wealth. Rawls argues that the distribution of these social primary goods among the members of a society is just if that distribution is made in accordance with the following principle of justice. The first principle is principle of equal basic liberty. Each person has the same indefensible claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties scheme, which is compatible with the same scheme of liberties for all. Principle 2, fair equality of opportunities difference principle. Social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. First, they are to be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. And second, they are to be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged member of society. These principles are listed here in the order of their lexical priority. By lexical priority, Rawls means that the first principle must be fully satisfied before the next principle is applied. It means, for instance, that liberty can be restricted only for the sake of liberty and not, say, for the sake of income or wealth. It must, however, be noted in this context that Rawls assumes that society, his own society, in fact, to which his principles of social justice are to be applied, is one which is reasonably well off and in which the basic material needs of all are provided for. The main purpose of the rule of priority is to assign greater importance to equal basic liberties than to other primary social goods. In basic liberties, Rawls includes freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, freedom of person along with the right to hold personal property, freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention, or in other words, the freedom of the rule of law, freedom of speech and assembly, and political freedom. According to Rawls, these basic rights and liberties enable us to exercise and realize our two highest order moral powers, namely the capacity to understand, apply, and act according to the principle of justice, and the capacity to form, revise, and pursue conceptions of the good. In Rawls' view, every member of a just society must be viewed as having these two moral capacities. These make them free and equal citizens. The moral equality of citizens means that they each have and view themselves as having a right to equal respect and consideration in determining the principles by which the basic arrangements of their society are to be regulated. The freedom of the citizens includes their freedom to realize their capacity to pursue their own conception of a good life. Since the distribution of social primary goods will have to respect the equality and freedom and fraternity and welfare, etc., of all the members of society, it cannot strictly be an equal distribution across the board. According to Rawls, once the basic material needs of the people are met, Their right to basic liberties is to be accorded priority over their right to other social primary goods, which are covered by the principle of equal opportunities and difference principle. While he is opposed to any unequal distribution of basic liberties, he assumes that some inequalities in income and wealth are inevitable and perhaps not undesirable. Accordingly, the main purpose of his second principle of social justice is to keep inequalities within the bounds of justice and fairness. Obviously, the distinction between just or fair inequalities and unjust or unfair inequalities is of crucial importance in Rawls' theory of social justice. Rawls thinks that excessive equality in income and wealth would destroy the economic incentives required for greater creativity and productivity. This would be harmful to both the rich and the poor. From the standpoint of the poor as well as of the rich, the justice does not require the complete elimination of economic inequality. Rawls believes that certain inequalities which serve as incentives for the greater creativity and productivity of the talented and the gifted are not unjust if that greater creativity and productivity are integrated into a social, structural, or institutional arrangement for distribution to the benefit of all, especially the least advantaged member of a society. He also thinks that giving advantage to the least advantaged would invariably entail giving benefit to everyone else. Rawls maintains that a society can so structure or restructure its basic institutions as to make inequalities in income and wealth yield maximum benefit to the least advantaged, maximum in comparison to any reasonable alternative social restructuring. His difference principle is meant not to replace inequality with equality in income and wealth, but to transform unfair or unjust degrees or kinds of economic inequalities into a fair or just kind or degree by maximizing the benefit of the least advantaged. According to the difference principle, inequalities which are advantageous to the better off but not to the least advantaged are unjust. Rawls' principle of fair equality of opportunity stipulates that the state should ensure fair equality of opportunity in the educational, cultural, and economic spheres, as well as provide unemployment and sickness benefits. These require an interventionist welfare state to run or aid schools to regulate the economy, etc. The principles of justice which we have discussed so far have been described by Rawls as special formulations of a general conception of justice. This general conception is stated as all social primary goods, liberty and opportunity, income and wealth, and the basis of self-respect are to be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution of any or all of these goods is to be the advantage of the least favored. What Rawls means by this general conception of justice is that only those inequalities are unjust which, as in case of utilitarianism, put some members or society at a disadvantage. This general conception of justice, however, does not differentiate between the different social primary goods. It does not say, for instance, how to resolve the conflict, if any, between the distribution of income and the distribution of liberty. It is to meet this difficulty that Ross divides the general conception into a special conception of the two principles which we have discussed above. Now let us move to the next point, that is the social contract procedure. So far our focus has been on the content of or substance of Rawls' principle of social or distributive justice. Let us now turn briefly to his method or procedure of argumentation in defense of those principles. Why, according to Ross, should we accept his principles rather than some other principles as principles of just or fair distribution? Briefly stated, Ross' response is that a social contract method or procedure of political deliberation respects the Kantian liberal egalitarian moral idea of the freedom and equality of all persons, and that an agreement or contract arrived at through such a method or procedure is just or fair in all the parties to that contract. He in fact adopts such a procedure and argues that all the contractors would agree to the above mentioned general and specific formulation of the principles of distributive justice, principles which he espouses and defends as the liberal democratic egalitarian principles of the social justice. His social contract is hypothetical and not historical or actual. It is only meant to be a hypothetical assembly or original position of heads of families. They hypothetically assemble before the formation or organization of their society in order to enter into an agreement or social contract on the general principles of distributive justice, on the basis of which the institutions of their society are to be constructed. In order to ensure impartiality and fairness in their agreement or social contract, and to incorporate the moral idea of the freedom and equality of persons, Rawls postulates that the contractors in his original position are under a veil of ignorance about their attributes, class, social status, or their own conceptions of the good. They, however, do have knowledge of the general circumstances of justice, such as the limited benevolence of people and the conflicts of interest over the limited amount of social primary goods. They also know that in the actual society in which they would have to live, they may perhaps end up as the least advantaged member of the society. given the uncertainty about the actual position which a contractor may come to occupy in the actual society. It is rational for him or her in the contracting situation, that is the original position, to assume that he or she may end up in the least advantaged position and accordingly to choose a general principle of distribution that would give the best deal to the least advantaged members of the society. Each contractor would, in other words, follow the maximum rule of choice, which says that in an uncertain situation one should choose so as to maximize one's minimum prospects. Taken together, Rawls' principles of social justice, ranked in the order of their lexical priority, embody the liberal egalitarian moral injunction of Kant, namely that human beings are always to be treated as ends in themselves and never as mere means to the ends of the others. From this perspective, it would be unjust to sacrifice the basic rights and liberties of some persons for the sake of any majoritarian or utilitarian conceptions of the good. Unlike liberal utilitarian justice, Rawls' liberal egalitarian justice is marked by its concern for the equality and welfare of everyone, including especially the least advantaged members of the society. Now let us move to the next point, that is the basic structure of society. Rawls has persuasively shown that social justice is of crucial importance to social life and that it should inform constitutions, laws, policies, legal processes, etc. In fact, according to him, the primary subject of justice is the basic structure of society. His principles of social justice justifies and is justified by liberal democracy, a regulated market economy, and the liberal egalitarian welfare state. He states that for translating his difference principle into practice, the government should have four branches: an allocation branch to keep the price system workably competitive and to prevent the formation of unreasonable market power; a stabilization branch to bring about reasonably full employment, and jointly with the allocation branch to maintain the efficiency of the market economy; a transfer branch to attend to claims of need and an appropriate standard of life; and a distribution branch to preserve an appropriate justice in distributive shares by taxation measures and adjustments in property rights. Here we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.